Thank you all for joining us again for another Thursday with one of our lightning talks. My name is Nader Kaizat. I'm your host for today. And today we're going to be bringing up Next.js, the React framework for web. And this is a way where we're empowering seamless and dynamic web applications with React framework. Myles is going to be, we recorded a video of Myles going through this presentation. So with that being said, let me play this video and we'll get started.
My name is Myles Dixon. I'm a technical lead with the web practice over at InRhythm. And today I'll be talking about Next.js. So it's kind of they consider themselves the React framework for the web, where React is a JavaScript framework. Next.js is a quote unquote React framework. So it's built on top of React and add some additional functionality to it. So some of the things that Next.js provides, similar to React, you can still build the front end of your websites and web applications, but it also kind of bundles in a node server in order to serve files, render pages, and create dynamic routes. So some of the kind of key use cases that you'd find for Next.js, places where performs really well, would be anywhere where you want to use static site generation. So things like a blog, and then anything where server-side rendering is valuable to you. So landing pages, home pages, anything where you're kind of focused on SEO, SEO score. So for those that aren't really familiar with SEO, search engine optimization, when a search engine like Google crawls the internet for results, the more that you can render on the server side, the more information that crawler is going to have when it's going through your page and indexing everything. So by having a server side rendered landing page or home pages for any various sections of your site, you can help kind of boost and drive those SEO metrics. I want to give a shout out here to Next.js version 13, which is the most recent version of Next.js. It really almost a total refactor and revamp of the framework that brings a lot more power of this full stack approach to your front end. Some of the examples of what they changed was they created this new app directory where you can store your layouts and server components for your React application, and you can stream resources directly from that. And some of the other key features added in Next.js 13 are Turbo Pack, which if that name looks familiar, it's part of that Turbo build, that sort of family of frameworks as well. They created this new Next image component, a new Next font component, and they've improved their Next link component. So some of the places that are actually using Next.js today are sites like Twitch, Hulu, DoorDash, Netflix, Lego site actually, and AT&T. And just to kind of show some of the growth that this framework has had, if you were to go look at the NPM package for Next.js, in May of 2021, it had 1.4 million weekly downloads. 2022, that number nearly doubled to 2.7. And as of today, that number has nearly doubled again. So it is a fast-growing framework as far as popularity is concerned. So I mentioned rendering methods before. In web development, you have the concept of really three main rendering methods. You have statically rendered, so this is going to be content that doesn't really change. You have server-side rendering, which is the actual server hosting your application will render a portion or a portion of that application ahead of time. And then client-side rendered, which is what most of us are familiar with when it comes to React.js. And to kind of visualize what this looks like, so say you have, we'll do that in a second. Say you have like a static page, you don't have data that's changing very often. So any kind of like documentation or blog posts are going to be like candidates for a static page. When you think of server-side rendering, that data needs to be either updated regularly or up to date when it's fetched, or depends on some kind of user input to it. And it's a lot more heavier on the server resources side of things. So some of your examples of that in practice today are going to be your e-commerce sites, or as mentioned before, anything that a search engine is going to crawl. And as far as client-side rendering goes, this is probably the most common rendered application. Any kind of data that's going to be changing frequently as users interact with it. You have page transitions. It's going to be things like an email application or any kind of like a social network. So this is just kind of like a couple little visual aids here. So in terms of client-side rendering, your client is first going to request the HTML from your server. Then there's going to be some kind of an API or database call to get some of this data. And then once you have that data on the client side, you will use that data to render the page into the user view. On the other hand, a server-side rendered application, when your user interacts with your client, that server is going to actually be hosting your HTML. Your database is going to pre-provide that data to your server's HTML, which will render the page. And then as far as the user is concerned, they only actually see one request, one sort of exchange of information there. So when it comes to things like load times, a static site is going to render the fastest because there's nothing really being processed by that static site. A server rendered page is going to have a slightly slower initial page load, but it's going to have a bit of a snappier time after that. And then client rendered is going to be your slowest of the three. Now, when it comes to search engine optimization, however, static site and server rendered basically have the same sort of benefits there, and client rendered is going to be your slowest option for this as well. So when it comes to Next.js, it sort of has this process it goes through. So it will first try to render a page as a static page if possible. Then after that, after it exhausts those options, it will then begin rendering dynamic pages on the server side on demand for any initial pages. And then any subsequent page loads are going to be handled client side. So why is this first page load important? From digital.com, we see here that 1 in 2 visitors will actually abandon an e-commerce site if that first page takes more than 6 seconds to load. Their time is too valuable to them and they're not going to stick around. And Google has, on the mobile side of things, 53% of mobile users will leave a site that takes longer than 3 seconds to load on their phone. So if your goal is to really drive revenue and drive user engagement on your website, that first page is critical to how long you actually, to that user retention step. So an example of a static page might look something like this. You just have, say you have this homepage component, and all it has here is just a header with a homepage and a paragraph tag saying, welcome to your homepage. There's nothing dynamic going on here. So this will just render completely statically. A static page with data fetching at build time, something that that Next supports, you start to use this function here called get static props. And what this function does is it allows you to fetch some properties that you would then pass to your React component. And this will actually take place at build time as opposed to runtime. So then when your application is built, it'll do whatever it'll fetch whatever data it needs, pass that data into the actual component that you're rendering, and that component will have that data available as it renders. Static page, you can take that with dynamic routes, is to take that previous example again one step further, and now not only are your properties being fetched at build time, but your actual routes, your paths are being fetched at build time as well. So say you have some API, and we'll actually explore this later, that provides some movie IDs, and you're going to be displaying a list of movies. Think like a Netflix queue. So at compile time, at build time, your application will fetch those IDs from whatever your API hosting those IDs is, and it will actually map those IDs into paths. Then those paths can then be used by your application to dynamically route, say somebody goes to /movie1, /movie2, etc. You again can use the static props function from before to fetch any of that data that's needed by those movies that you're now fetching dynamically as well. And so when you go to render this movie page, component here, for example, your data is fetched dynamically but built statically at render time, and your paths are built along at render time along with that. Now, when it comes to server-side rendering, in contrast to static generation here, very similar format to these functions, get server-side props. And this is going to essentially call some API fetch those products in this case, and return those as properties to, or to return those properties as an object from this function. Then when you go to actually render your component, looks very similar again to the static example here. Now you just be mapping those properties or mapping over that property value and displaying some dynamic information there. So I mentioned routing in one of those past examples with this dynamic routing thought process. So Next actually has a router built into it at Next router, or in this case, we'll be using Next link. So whenever you're working with this dynamic routing concept, you're going to want to import this link component from Next link. And what this actually does is this works with the sort of router that's built into the Next framework, and will handle any of those client-side page changes that you're going. And is where the performance benefit comes into this is, as a user is scrolling through your page, as soon as that link object, that link element comes into the viewport, Next is going to immediately go ahead and prefetch that page. So if you're familiar with like lazy loading, prefetch is a way to essentially, behind the scenes, away from the user's view, your application will fetch some of the data it needs from any kind of a page transition or API call, and have that ready to go so that when they go to actually load that information in their viewport, it's already there. File-based routing within Next kind of looks like this. So Next.js applications, if you ever pull one down or look at an example, and we'll look at an example later, have a very specific way that the files are organized within the application itself. So say we have a website at example.com. So, and this is a Next.js application. So what would this look like on the file side? So first you'd have your source directory. Within there, you'd have your pages directory. Within pages, you'd have an index.js file. And this will automatically be the file that drives your example.com root level page, similar to like an index.html. Now from there, we'll add a product directory below pages, and we'll have a landing page for products as well, again with an index.js file, similar to an index.html file. Now what this generates then in Next is you now have a route example.com/products. So if we add a sales to this products, Next will generate example.com/products/sales. And finally, to call back to that IDs example before, say we have an unknown number of products, or in this case, sale IDs, you can actually do in Next what's called a slug, or a dynamic route, where if you wrap your file name in these square brackets, it'll actually take a query parameter essentially. So this might look similar to something like Node.js if you've developed routes in Node before, where you provide a essentially query parameter in your URL or in your route. So in this case, if someone was to go to example.com products 1234, the code running in this product ID.js file would actually be able to get 1234 as a query parameter and use that value in the logic. So with API routes, as mentioned, Next has a router built into it. So if you wanted to hook into that router, you can actually pass it a handling function, similar to how you would handle this in, say, something like Express.js, where you can, have a switch statement in here with some different methods, in this case, request.method, and handle your data that you may be getting from some API somewhere, in this case, a GET. So you would return and send this data. Or if you wanted to handle posting, again, you would have some method or some handler function to create that data on whatever database you might be using, and then you could just send a status message with success or error on a failure with a reject. So what this essentially generates is in your in that same source pages directory from before, if you were to add a folder called API, the Next framework will then know, okay, this is actually an API handler, not a page to render. So then if you had to call this API from one of your pages, you could do so by hitting this essentially API route here, example.com/API/users. The framework itself will know, okay, this is my file structure. So this is the associated route or API route to go with the logic in that file. Finally, we mentioned lazy loading of links before. If you've ever developed any kind of a web page and had performance in mind, images are probably the bane of your existence. So when it comes to images on modern web, Next.js will convert those image formats to modern performance-focused formats like WebP and AVIF. It will also look at the screen size being rendered, the viewport size that the user is coming from, and it will, if you have the assets available, send the appropriate image size based on that screen size. So, for example, on a desktop image, you might send a whole, a higher resolution 464 kilobyte image, whereas on mobile, you don't need that high resolution. You can send a smaller image, leading again to those lower load times, which call back to that first page, user retention. And by default, these breakpoints are defined at 640, 750, 828, 1080, 1200, 1920, 2048, and 3840 pixels. So from 640p all the way up to 4K. Another SEO factor is something called cumulative layout shift. So oftentimes, if you have a website that then loads an image after the fact, some of that content will move, and that's considered cumulative layout shift. So with that next image component that I mentioned earlier, Next.js will intelligently allocate that space on your web page for the image. And then once that image loads in, your layout doesn't shift and you don't get dinged on your performance scores from Google. Lazy loading images. So another kind of key function of this image component provided by Next is that it won't actually spend the network cycles to load those images until you, the user, actually need them. So in this case, at this example.com website, this image down here would not actually start loading yet. But as the user begins to scroll down the page and this image gets closer and closer to coming into the viewport, Next will begin to actually fetch that asset and start loading it, so that when the user scrolls to where that image is, it's already there, ready to go. And if that user never scrolled at all, then they never have to load that file. So their initial load experience on this, first step is going to be faster. So in summary, Next.js uses static site generation, server-side rendering for search engine optimization and quicker first page loads. It has automatic code splitting and route prefetching, which results in smaller bundle sizes. And it can handle image optimization for smaller images and lazy loading. And I'd like to share a quick little example here to figure out how I can change from the screen that I'm sharing. Let's go ahead. Oh yeah, new share. Here we go. So let me go ahead and hop over to my VS Code window. So is that now showing VS Code, I hope? So here I have just a generic starter blog repo. This is actually provided by the people over at Vercel as an example for Next. And what this repo is going to actually show off here is essentially a statically generated blog using markdown files as the data source. So if we go into this posts folder here, we'll see we've got these 3 markdown files. And these are going to be our blog posts that we render. So I won't go into the details of all these different components. It's pretty chunky. I will provide the link to this repo on the Next.js example page though. So if I was to go to build this, so npm run build, we'll see a couple things happen here. So you see build, we see next build. So the first thing it's going to do is run through and do a data validation on the TypeScript side of this. And we're going to see it's creating this optimized production build. So what this is going to look like is we'll essentially get a sort of like a tree view of how Next is splitting out, chunking out this application. So we'll see the first thing it's going to do is it's going to create these routes. So we can see what that file size is going to look like for our first load. And we can see here, if we go to our pages, we see we have that index mentioned before, but we have posts and we have this slug. So what this is actually representative of is we're going to have a route for, you see here, we have posts hello world, posts preview, and post dynamic routing coming from these 3 blog posts that we've rendered or that we have in our data source. So we didn't actually have to define, a route for each blog post. Next.js took care of that for us via this file syntax here. You can see here that uh, SSG, so static site generation. You can see it generated static HTML plus JSON because this page is using get static props mentioned before. So we can see here this is grabbing all of our posts by slug and passing those as props to the actual post component defined over here in components. So what this then actually looks like if we were to run this, so npm run, or just we'll just do an npm start here since we've already built it. If we were to go to this localhost link, go ahead and share my screen again over here. We can see that I actually have the wrong thing. This is not what I want. Localhost 3000. I think I actually have I think I have yep, that's what it was. I had the previous example from Godfrey running, so apologies. So here's our statically generated blog. We can see here that at localhost at the root, we just have our index from before, but if I was to click on one of these posts, we can see that the route for this is posts hello world. Or if we were to go back, we can do on, posts preview, post dynamic routing. See that route changes each time. And to go back to the code again, if we were to look in the actual build folder, we would see there's this pre-render manifest. So Next.js will automatically generate pre-renders of your pages. And if I go into, I believe it is in server pages posts, we'll see here we have the pre-rendered HTML for each of these pages. So even though that data is dynamic, it's loaded in here, and Next.js will automatically generate those pre-renders that you can use for your SEO needs. So with that, let me hop back over to the talk here.
Thank you, Myles. That was really great and very detailed. And just to follow up with that, we do lightning talks every Thursday at 5:15 Eastern time. So please join us for next time's topic. As you know, in this industry, in this day and age, one of the main things that we do focus on is security. And Kita will be talking about OAuth 2.0 for next time. So make sure you mark your calendar and join us next Thursday. That being said, thank you all and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.